Hey, Janice.
Hi, Anthony.
Today, let's talk about three common mistakes when choosing the executor. And I know we've done this or similar episodes in the past, but this just keeps coming up. And
Yes.
yeah, we've had some recent examples we'd love to just kind of throw into the mix. So here we go. Just remember, everyone, your executor, I've said this over and over, but I guess it's a bit repeating. Your
It's so
executor,
important.
your executor is not your best man. You're not choosing the person you're closest to or who you have the most history with. It's not your maid of honor. Similarly, it's not your best friend. It's not your favorite child or not necessarily the oldest child. It's the person who's best suited for the job at that time. So I just can't stress that enough.
It's very clearly very important. So today we will discuss the qualifications and how about it's not about your favorites or nepotism,
Yeah.
and then it's not a job to hand out.
Right. All right. Let's get started here. So you need to when you're making your will and you're choosing who's going to be your executor. So there's two different situations when you're the person making your will, which we're talking about now, and later we'll talk about the situation where somebody has passed and the family is sort of deciding who should be the executor or administrator because you can't actually opt out and choose somebody else if all the family members are voting unanimously. So anyway,
Right.
when you're making your will and choosing the executor for your estate when you pass, make sure whoever you choose is actually qualified and legally eligible to be your executor. Otherwise, what was the point? And
Right.
so one example we came up against recently was if your executor must either be a U.S. citizen, not legal resident, a U.S. citizen, or if not a U.S. citizen, they must live in New York State. They must have a New York resident address. So if you nominate your brother who lives in California who's not a U.S. citizen, you really haven't nominated anybody at all because he cannot serve, at least not by himself. So, I mean, just make sure you understand what it takes to be legally eligible to serve an executor. Otherwise, you're not really, it's kind of a waste of mental energy. You're just choosing somebody who's not going to be able to do it anyway. You also, one other, I guess, disqualifying thing is, I don't know how many people have this, but no
Well,
felons. You can't have a felon as a executor. That's shorthand for anyone who's been in prison for or sentenced to prison for 1 year or longer. And this one is a little more, it's not a legal rule, but it's a practical rule. You need somebody with good credit because the vast majority of the times, if there's any conflict or any problems, the court's going to want the executor to file a bond, which is shorthand for a estate insurance policy. And you can't get those unless you have a good credit score, probably 650 or more for smallish estates, 700 to 800 for larger estates. Yeah.
and that might be hard to find out, but you could probably make a good judgment call based on their, you know, overall. I don't know if you could call. That'd be a hard one to just call and say, "Could you please tell me your credit score?" Because I want to name you my
I totally
executor.
disagree on that, Janice. I feel
Right?
like
Okay,
everyone in my
tell me.
life, family or friends, I could ballpark what range they're in based on their spending
Well,
habits.
right.
And
You could make that generalized assumption. That's a good point. I don't know that I'd ask, but I probably could make a. So you have to make a good general educated decision.
I mean, the guy, your college buddy who has had his car leases. I don't I don't want to get into
Car
it.
repossessed. He's living on mom's couch
Yeah.
and not paying rent. Probably isn't a good credit situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Next, let's talk about not choosing your favorites. All right. So this applies if you are making your will and and the person naming your own executor, or if it's a situation after death where the family is sort of getting together and voting on the situation and choosing which nephew should take over, something like that. So again, this is not about who is your God. I mean, nobody thinks they're just picking favorites. So what do people tell themselves? What are they rationalizing? Oh, he's the oldest, or he's the most
Right.
even if you have the most responsible person, if the most responsible person lives in Arizona and the estate is in New York. Oh, here's what I wrote in one of my books. The most responsible person is actually usually the most busiest and the least likely to have the time to be the executor.
Right. Exactly. So
the most responsible person has a solid family and kids who he or she takes care of, and has a job, and is probably busy with the PTA or this or that, and
right.
Being an executor takes a lot of time. So it's kind of like a catch-22.
Time.
Yeah.
Right.
You want the one who has a lot of free time, which might mean that person is like unemployed or
right.
It really isn't about favorites or it's first for the person who's best suited at that time. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Now this last example is kind of a niche situation, but it's come up and it's become a concern of mine. How do I put this? Naming the executor, again, whether it's when you're doing your will or if it's after the fact and the family members are choosing, unanimously somebody. The executor role is not an act of charity. Let me back up here. So an executor earns a commission or a fee or a salary, whatever you want to call it, for his or her job or service as an executor, right? But that's exactly what it is. It is a fee for services rendered. It is not a charity situation where, well, I'll give you an example. My homemaid has been so kind to me. I want to make sure that she's taken care of, so I'm going to name her the executor. So number one, if you want to give her something, just give her a gift in your will, like a cash.
Just give her money. Right.
Don't give her a job that she's not suited for.
Exactly.
Yeah. Similarly, my nephew is... he's a struggling musician.
Right.
He's really talented, by the way, but he just hasn't caught a break. So he just needs some money to get him off the ground. Same thing. Just give him a cash gift to my quote unquote talented nephew. I was doing air quotes.
Correct.
Yeah. Don't give him a job that impacts the rest of your family, by the way, because it needs to be done correctly. Again, for which he or she may not be well suited. Your rock and roll nephew might not be the best one to do a complex legal, tax, and accounting job.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And it shouldn't be, when I say charity, it's also a situation where we talked about this on the earlier point. Yeah, the most responsible family member typically is busy, right? Has a job, kids, whatever.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that this should be a job for just whoever is the most unemployed family member.
The most available unemployed, yes.
Yeah. So, so I've been saying a lot of not. So, I mean, I think ideally you're looking for someone who's experienced and either retired or on sabbatical or in between, voluntarily between jobs.
Right.
And even then, those folks probably don't want to do it.
It's a hard job. We've talked about this at length before. Yeah. This is not an easy one signature job. Yep. It is a hard job. And when you weigh it all out, the pay really isn't as great as you might think it is.
Well, especially for someone who's not, who's doing everything for the first time ever, right?
Correct, because it's going to take longer, right? Absolutely.
All right, so I feel like I've beaten that horse pretty dead.
Beaten the dead horse.
Let's just wrap this up here.
Well, you feel strongly about it, which makes sense because you've seen, 1 or 200,000 cases with just these problems. So if you guys want to learn more, please read the How to Hire an Executor book by Anthony, available on Amazon. Digs into it a little bit deeper so you can make better decisions now for your family later.
So we have a couple of these situations percolating right now. Maybe we'll update you all when we see exactly how it plays out and what headaches have transpired with the, let's call them non-optimal executors.
Yes. I'd love to talk about some of those stories.
All right. Well, thank you, Janice, for jumping on here. And thanks everyone else for listening. Talk to you next time. Bye.
Talk soon.